Whispers in Riedridge. The early morning sun broke across the sprawling plains of the western frontier, casting long shadows across the town of Riedridge. In the small, dusty town, everything seemed to move at the pace of the wind, slow but steady. The people of Riedridge had seen all manner of travelers come and go, but nothing quite like Claire Mayfield. A woman arriving alone, with a child in tow, already pregnant, they whispered. Clara had been traveling for weeks, crossing treacherous terrain, her heart pounding with every mile as she thought of the new life awaiting her in Riedridge. She had placed an ad, written with hope in her heart, looking for a husband. Robert Langston, a rancher, had answered that ad, offering her the promise of a home. The words were kind, sincere. The rancher had said he was looking for a good woman to share his life with, someone who could help him with the farm and maybe help raise a family. She had packed everything she could, taking her son, Thomas, and leaving behind the crumbling city she had known. Clara wasn't a young woman anymore. She was past 30, but still youthful enough to dream of a new life, a new beginning. The pain of her past, the battles of survival during the war, the heartbreak of losing everything had been buried deep in her heart. Thomas was all she had left. But when Clara stepped off the stagecoach in Riedridge, with Thomas clutching her hand, the reactions were swift. The whispers began almost immediately. Her long, brown hair, once neat, now disheveled from the long journey, and the soft curve of her belly, a slight protrusion that even the loose-fitting dress she wore couldn't hide, became the subject of everyone's conversation. She had expected nervous glances, even suspicion. What she hadn't expected was the coldness. As she arrived at the small boarding house where she was to stay until Robert arrived to meet her, Clara was met with a strained politeness. Mrs. Holbrook, the matronly woman who ran the house, said little, only offering Clara a room in the back, away from the eyes of the town. "Not many people in town will understand your situation," Mrs. Holbrook remarked. "Best to stay out of sight for now." Clara smiled, grateful for the kindness, but she knew that the town was already passing judgment. She had seen it before in the city, and now, on the frontier, the whispers only grew louder. When Robert Langston arrived 2 days later, Clara was already preparing herself for the disappointment she feared would come. She had hoped for a fresh start, a chance to raise her son in peace, but as Robert's large figure loomed at the door, Clara could already tell the meeting would not be what she had imagined. "I'm Robert Langston," he said, his voice deep, his eyes a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "You must be Clara." Clara nodded, stepping forward to greet him, but before she could say a word, Robert's eyes fell on her belly. His gaze lingered there for a moment, too long for comfort. He shifted his feet, his hands twitching by his sides. "I didn't expect this," Robert finally said, his voice soft but filled with an unspoken judgment. "I didn't realize you were already pregnant." Clara finished for him, her heart sinking. Robert looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "I thought you might be a little older, but I didn't realize." He trailed off, his words hanging in the air like an accusation. Clara stood silently, trying to hide the sting of his words. "I came here for a fresh start," she said, her voice steady despite the wave of emotion crashing inside her. "I thought you wanted a woman to share your life, someone to help with the farm. I thought I could be that woman." Robert hesitated, glancing back over his shoulder at the dusty street. He could feel the weight of the town's eyes on him, waiting for his decision. He shifted again, his thoughts conflicting. "I didn't know about the child," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "I didn't think." "I understand," Clara said, cutting him off, her voice calm but filled with quiet hurt. "I can go back to the boarding house, find somewhere else to stay." She turned to leave, but Robert reached out, his hand briefly touching her arm. "Wait," he said. "I'm not saying you have to leave. But, Clara, I can't offer you marriage with a child on the way." Her heart dropped. She had known, deep down, this would happen. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and turned away, leaving Robert to stare after her. For days, Clara stayed at Mrs. Holbrook's house, her thoughts a tangled mess. The town's whispers never ceased. Some women came to offer her sympathy, while others, more judgmental, simply stared and walked away. Clara spent her days with Thomas, teaching him how to read and write, telling him stories of far-off places, of hope, of courage. He was the only thing keeping her from sinking into despair. But then, one evening, after Clara had gone out to fetch water from the well, she returned to find the atmosphere of the house changed. The tension was palpable. A man had arrived in town. Captain Elijah Hart, a war hero and former officer who had seen countless battles, was a man few in Ridge had ever met but all had heard of. His reputation had spread far and wide, and he carried with him the aura of someone who had faced and survived unimaginable horrors. He arrived on horseback, his uniform neatly pressed, his face set with determination. It wasn't long before he asked about Clara. "I need to speak with Miss Mayfield," he told Mrs. Holbrook, his voice commanding. "It's important," the truth revealed. Clara stood at the doorway of the boarding house, her hands still damp from drawing water at the well, when she first laid eyes on the man standing in the parlor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a soldier's bearing. His eyes, a deep storm gray, immediately locked with hers. He gave a polite nod, removing his hat. "Miss Mayfield," he said, "my name is Captain Elijah Hart." Clara hesitated, confused. She stepped cautiously into the room, drying her hands on her apron. "Yes, I'm Clara. Have we met?" "Not formally," he said, "but I've come a long way to find you. May I speak with you privately?" Mrs. Holbrook excused herself immediately, and Clara gestured toward the small sitting area in the back. Once seated, Elijah leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "I knew your late husband," he said plainly. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Elijah continued gently. "We served together in the war. He spoke of you and your son often. His name was William Mayfield, wasn't it?" Clara nodded slowly, her voice nearly a whisper. "Yes. I was with him in his final days," Elijah said. "He asked me to find you to make sure you and your boy were safe. That was his dying wish." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "I didn't think anyone knew what happened to him. I thought he just never returned." Elijah shook his head. "He fought bravely, saved lives. But in the end," he paused, swallowing the heaviness in his voice, "he made me promise. And I failed you. I should have come sooner." Clara sat in silence, emotions colliding inside her, grief, gratitude, sorrow, relief. "Why now?" she asked softly. "I was wounded, hospitalized. It took me months to recover. And when I finally set out, tracking you wasn't easy. You moved after the war. No address, just fragments of information. But eventually, I found the ad you placed for a mail-order marriage, and I followed the trail here." Clara stared at him, still trying to grasp the whirlwind of revelations. "You came all this way for us." "Yes," Elijah said simply, "because I owed him, and because when I heard how this town treated you, I couldn't stay silent." Clara glanced away, embarrassed. "They think I'm pregnant, but I'm not. It's a benign tumor. The doctor in my last town said it's not dangerous yet, but it makes me look, well, it causes misunderstanding." Elijah frowned, then looked into her eyes with unmistakable respect. "You've endured more than most could bear." That night, Ridge buzzed with the news. The war hero had come not for business or land, but for Clara Mayfield. Rumors spread like wildfire, and the same people who had whispered behind her back now peeked through their curtains, desperate for glimpses of the unfolding drama. The following morning, Elijah strode confidently through the main street, Clara at his side, holding Thomas's hand. When they reached the Langston Ranch, Clara hesitated, but Elijah squeezed her hand reassuringly. Robert Langston opened the door, confusion spreading across his face when he saw them. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyeing Elijah warily. Elijah didn't waste time. "You made a mistake, Mr. Langston," he said clearly. "This woman is not what your town whispers claim. She's a war widow, and her husband was a hero. She traveled across the country for a second chance, not to deceive, but to survive." Robert looked uncomfortable, his face paling. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Elijah said coldly. "You judged her without knowing the truth. And your judgment cost you something rare, a strong, loyal woman who would have stood by your side. Robert's gaze flickered to Clara, guilt settling in his expression. Clara, It's too late, Clara said gently, but firmly. I forgive you, but I can't forget. Elijah placed a protective arm around her. She deserves better. That public confrontation changed everything. Clara was no longer the outcast. She was a respected war widow, protected by a hero. The townspeople now greeted her with hesitant smiles, trying to erase the damage their silence had caused. And while she appreciated the change, Clara remained cautious. Forgiveness was easier than trust. Elijah stayed in Reed Ridge, renting a room beside the boarding house. Each day, he spent time with Clara and Thomas, repairing the broken pieces of her life bit by bit. He helped with chores, read to Thomas by candlelight, and shared stories of the past with Clara that made her laugh and cry. One quiet evening, as the sun set behind the hills and the air grew still, Clara and Elijah sat on the porch together. You've done more for us than anyone ever has, Clara said, her voice low. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to, Elijah replied. But if you'll allow it, I like to stay, not out of obligation, not because of a promise I made to a dying man, but because I care for you. And Thomas, deeply. Clara looked at him, eyes wide. Are you asking me to? I'm asking you to consider building a life. Together, he said, his voice calm and certain. No expectations, just the possibility of something good. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Then let's try, one day at a time. That winter, Reed Ridge saw its first snowfall in years. And in the little chapel at the edge of town, Clara Mayfield walked down the aisle in a dress of soft ivory, with Thomas at her side, proudly holding her hand. Captain Elijah Hart waited for her at the altar, a soft smile playing on his lips. The town, once quick to judge, now stood in awe as the woman they had cast aside married the man who reminded them what true honor looked like. Together, Clara, Elijah, and Thomas built a new life, one born not of rescue, but of redemption, respect, and love.